Welcome to another session in our Proline Academy series for Strata Council members. As you may already know, my name is Catherine Squires-Bassan, and I'm the Director of Culture and Community here at Proline. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about the session and then hand it over to Christy and Dario to get into all the good stuff. Speaking of which, I'll introduce both of them. We have Christy Tamburi, Strata Property Manager and one of our managing brokers. She's been with us here at Proline for over 10 years. And Dario Anselmo, who's also a Strata Property Manager, and he's been with us for over 5 years. We also have IT on the chat if anybody has technical difficulties, so they'll be here keeping an eye on things. We plan for the presentation to take about 45 minutes, so we should have some time for questions at the end. If you do have questions, as always, please put them in the Q&A function. That means everybody else can see your questions and see if they've been asked already or see what questions are coming up. And then we'll answer the questions through that feature. And another reminder, today's session is being recorded. We will send a link out to everyone who has registered for it once the recording has been processed, which will probably be sometime next week. I think those are all those quick details. On other items, before we jump in, I just wanted to review quickly the other pieces of our Proline Academy resources. And I know I've mentioned this before, promise it'll be really short. Just wanted to remind you that we offer a number of different opportunities for learning for our Strata Council members and our residents and owners. So there are virtual lunch and learns for council members for you to hear directly from service providers and professionals. And then we have sessions like today's session that's presented by our internal experts. And these sessions go deeper into specifics around how strata corporations and communities function. We also have our Strata Council manual available on all the Strata websites in the Council Only folder, which is a great resource for when you have questions that come up. We also publish a quarterly newsletter that you may be familiar with and will be coming out very soon here. We're also excited to be planning the first of our 2 in-person sessions for the year in Parksville in June. And so that is going to kick off some summer fun. If you have any questions or suggestions regarding these educational offerings, please feel free, as always, to reach out to me. I'm happy to get your ideas and incorporate them in future things. And now I'm going to hand this session over to Christy and Dario to dive into today's topic.
Excellent. Thanks, Catherine, for getting us started. So before we jump into talking about why we're here today, we're going to launch a poll, and I'm curious around how long each of you have been on your current Strata Council. So if you could answer the poll, we'll review the results when we've got all of the answers. In the meantime, what are we talking about today? We are talking about how best to work together. And so we're going to talk about the parameters of positive working relationships holistically, the role and responsibilities that come along with being a Strata Council member. We'll share some guidelines and approaches for best practices and how your Strata can work towards having the best meetings. And we'll also touch on some extras that help councils work smarter, not harder. So having said that, we have the results of our poll. So we have 29% of participants here on their council for less than a year, 32% 1 to 2 years, 19% 3 to 5, and then our lifelong troopers at 19%, they have been on council forever, aka more than 5 years. So we have a really nice spread here. That's great. It's always fantastic to see newbies joining in on these, but also some of the council members that have been doing that council business for a long time. It's nice to have updates and new information. So now that we kind of know who's here and what we're talking about, we can move on to the bigger picture. And before we kind of get into the nitty gritty, I just want to provide a little bit of a disclaimer almost. And I want to recognize that this particular session may seem a little bit weird and could even be a bit sensitive. Other topics we've generally discussed: how to handle your community, your projects, bylaws, and governance. But today we're talking about the most effective way to approach your property management company, which of course for you guys is us. So please understand that when your strata manager and Dario and I, when we're doing these academy sessions, are not lecturing, but helping to provide insight and support. This session is absolutely no different. We're not lecturing around how we want you to work with your strata manager and with Proline. We want to help foster that relationship. So this is all about how you can get the best value out of your strata dollar as it relates to your relationship with Proline, and to make the best use of your valuable volunteer time in interacting with your fellow council members, owners and residents within your strata community, with contractors, and all of the other players that you are engaged with as a council member, by ensuring that we're all working together efficiently. So to start, we'll talk about our role being Proline's role and your role being the strata council member role. So your strata manager essentially is considered to be your trusted advisor. They give advice and guidance and act kind of as the expert in the industry. They will provide you with the answers to your questions, but they might not always provide you with what exactly you want to hear. We're not yes men. We are here to give you the straight goods, the straight information. And so sometimes that's not the easiest to hear, but we're going to tell it to you straight. Ultimately, though, we're not intended as strata managers to be task managers and do all of the things, but more to facilitate getting strata related business done. And so ultimately collaboration between your strata council and Proline is really key in that. And as I've mentioned, we help to provide education to not only your strata council, but your owners. And we do that when legislative requirements and updates come through. And we've seen a lot of those in the last year or two. But we're ultimately not here to run your community. We provide the information, and then the decisions ultimately come from the strata council. Given that we've been in business on the island for almost 40 years, though, we can also refer strata and strata council members to other professionals in the greater community. So that's also an important piece of the puzzle. But basically, we achieve more together when both sides are actively engaged. And so that's the best approach to the relationship between the strata council and Proline. It's important to note that while our strata managers are experts in all things strata related, we do not provide legal advice and support. We're not licensed for that. Engineering and plumbing. Often I'm asked by councils, oh, can you go and inspect the work of the roofing contractor? And I often laugh because no one wants me to inspect a roofing contractor's work. It's not within my area of expertise. And so that's why we connect you with important experts out in the community that can provide their scope of expertise. And I do want to mention, sorry, before we go on to the next slide, that much of the content of this presentation actually comes from our own internal trusted advisor training. So we are sharing the same information with our team so that the new kind of generation of strata property managers understand their role and responsibility as well. Okay, so now that we've talked about the role and responsibility, what guides that relationship? That is the agency agreement. The agency agreement is the contract between your strata corporation and Proline, and it authorizes Proline to act as the agent on behalf of the corporation. This means that when we, as Proline, interact with owners, contractors, government, and all of the other players involved, we are acting on the strata's behalf, as if we were the strata. This is one of the critical reasons that we actually need to act within the direction of the strata council, because when we do things as your agent, it's as if we're doing it, or as if the strata is doing it itself. The agency agreement is also considered kind of a service agreement in that it clarifies what we do for you and what you can expect of us. So you'll find, for example, information on how many council meetings a year are included in the management fee, the average number of hours per week that is expected for Proline to work on your strata, and other very specific parameters. If you have a large project or a particularly important task that needs more attention than what you typically require of your strata manager or of Proline, and you need to go beyond what the agency agreement allows, there's certainly an opportunity for extra time. It's just a matter of having a conversation with your strata manager and discussing what that process looks like. And also, I just want to add, there's nothing stopping a strata council from meeting independently outside of Proline. That's totally acceptable, and many stratas do it. I would just encourage you, if you're holding a formal meeting and making decisions, take notes so that we can put together minutes for that meeting, and we can even set you up with a template for minutes ahead of time, or we can help to kind of polish the minutes up after the fact so that we can get them out to your owners. Another note, be aware that the contract also stipulates that we will do things like file the Strata Corporation's taxes and manage the Strata's website if you've got a Strata Press website. This particular contract is located in the council-only folder on the Strata Press website. And again, it clarifies the parameters of the relationship, includes a Schedule A with very specific details. And if you have questions, you can reach out to your strata manager about that, or to any one of us here at Proline. Okay, with all of that exciting talk about the agency agreement, I'm going to pass it over to Dario.
Thanks, Christy. So let's talk about what this all means in practice. And that can be a complex question because it's not about the hard facts of the agreement, as we just discussed. Often it's about personal relationships. And so first, we'll talk about healthy working relationships, because at the end of the day, stratas are all about people. This is a business all about people. You've got residents, owners, council, Proline employees, the contractors we work with. They're all people. It's important that we understand how to effectively work with each other, what our roles are, and how we can ensure that nothing's getting lost in communication. So first, let's talk a bit about having a healthy working relationship between council and Proline. A strata and a management company can have a working relationship lasting decades, and we can interact with each other on a weekly, sometimes even a daily basis. So it's important that this relationship be strong. And the key here is that we are on your team. As a strata, you're paying us to do a job for you. And part of what we're here to do in this session is to help you get the best bang for your buck in what you're paying us for. So understand, as Christy said, we're here to help you. We do want what's best for your community, and we're going to approach you as though you want what's best for your community, because I believe you do. And if there's a disagreement between council and Proline, approach that disagreement with curiosity about why we are disagreeing with you. Christy already kind of mentioned this, but again, I promise that if we're telling you not to do something, it's not because we love red tape. That's not why I'm here. We work with a lot of red tape. We work with a lot of government regulations, and we have experiences with what other stratas have gone through. And often we're just trying to take our experiences and our knowledge and stop you from, sometimes you're trying to do something, but we've seen other stratas try to do the exact same thing and it hasn't worked out. And we're just trying to avoid you from having unintended consequences and trying to help you accomplish your goals the best way that you can. So let's next talk about different roles that we can play. And we have another quick poll before this one. Let's throw that up here. Okay. I'm not seeing the result yet, but I will continue by saying, it's especially important in, to use almost corporate speak, today's fast-paced environment. But it's true, we have a very fast-paced environment. And here's the result. We've got about 41% saying call the Proline, 59% saying call the waste company. Absolutely no one saying roll the dumpster into the gorge. And that's great, because that's something I would definitely advise you not to do. So again, we all have a limited time in the day. Stratas often have a lot going on and can be seen very fast paced. And I often see councils who are burnt out and they're struggling and they feel that they have so much on their plate. And often you do have a lot on your plate as volunteers. But often it's not the volume of the work that's the problem, or at least the main problem, as so much as the way we're getting the work done. And so we want to look for those efficiencies because all of our time is limited and valuable. And I myself included often end up making a lot of extra work for myself. So let's talk about how clearly defined roles can help streamline that workload. Just because Proline acts as a Stratus agent, it doesn't mean that everything needs to come through us. Often things coming through us is the best way to maintain the Stratus records because we can keep everything in one file. But it's important for the big stuff. But again, the small stuff, we just talked about the garbage collection. If you phone or email me to let me know that your garbage did not get picked up, that's great. I'm happy to help. I will contact the garbage company. But consider that the phone call you spent to me and the time you spent telling that to me, you could have called the waste company and in about the same amount of time told them that your waste hadn't gotten picked up. So it's the same amount of work for you, but the waste company is going to get there faster. I might not be able to call the waste company right away if I'm in a meeting or dealing with an emergency at another strata or even an emergency at your strata. Again, I'm happy to help, but I'm going to put that request in priority order. And I'm not necessarily going to make the call right away like you could have. And the same can be said for the process of getting quotes. So Proline has a relationship with contractors. We can recommend contractors for your projects. And sometimes it is most appropriate for me to make that first reach out to a contractor, particularly with the bigger projects. Something like an infrared scan. I've got your depreciation report. I've got all the electrical reports and all the engineering reports. I can coordinate with the electrician and make sure they have all the keys that they need and all the information they need. But on the other side, imagine that you see a window or a couple windows in your strata that need fixing. Again, you could call me and say, hey, please call First Response Glass and ask them to contact me to set up an appointment. And then you describe to me where all the windows are. But you're making more work for yourself by doing that because you could have just given that all that information to First Response Glass. Instead, you've given it to me, and now you're waiting for me to call First Response Glass and for First Response Glass to call you when you could have called them directly. Sometimes council members think that you should call me first or Proline first because we're going to get a better response from the contractor. Often or all the time, if you call the contractor and just tell them that you're on a Proline managed building, they are going to give you the preferred rates, the preferred timetables. Tell them that the invoice is going to us and they'll be happy to do it. Sometimes too, council members feel like they shouldn't be making these decisions without council approval or even Proline's approval. And that's really at the heart of this roles and responsibilities. It's important to build these relationships with your fellow council members and your property manager in advance. Discuss in advance, such as at the first meeting after an AGM, is everyone comfortable if I see a door that's jammed and need a locksmith? Can I just call the locksmith without having to get an email vote of all council members before doing that? Do people want another email vote that we all have to send 8 emails about, or do you want me to just call the locksmith? Again, to be clear, I'm happy to call contractors to set things up. Proline is happy to call the contractors for you. We're not saying we don't want to help you with this. What we're saying is oftentimes it's actually more work for you to contact us and try to explain everything to us when you could have done the same thing for the contractor. Or again, emailing all of your council members about something when you could have decided in advance. Yes, if you see a lock that needs a locksmith, just call the locksmith. It's about me getting the same amount of work done, Proline getting the same amount of work done, you as council getting the same amount of work done to a higher quality and in less time, because we spend less time coordinating between each other, less time playing telephone tag, and more time actually just getting the work done. And speaking of working with contractors, I will take a quick break and give Christy a chance to talk about the relationships you have with contractors.
Thanks, Dario. So for the same reasons that you want to have a healthy relationship with Proline, you and your strata corporation obviously want to have healthy relationships with the contractors that you engage to complete work at your community. A good relationship with a contractor can go a really long way, and a bad experience can create ripples and issues that last a long time. Contractors can refuse to service your property, and we live on an island where contractors network and communicate with one another. You do not want to get on their blacklist. As I've mentioned, Proline has been locally operated on the island for almost 40 years. So over the course of that time, as Dario alluded to, we've been working long-term with local contractors and have developed relationships that benefit our clients, including preferred rates and service response times. So we can certainly assist you in your relationship with your contractors and connect you with contractors. But there is ultimately a relationship directly between the strata and the contractor. And so fostering that relationship can really benefit the strata corporation. Having a council member, for example, or someone else that's authorized by the council to meet with a contractor and be on site while a project is taking place is a great way to strengthen that relationship. So for example, you've got your window cleaning going on. A council member could meet the contractor, kind of get them settled and ready to go, and can provide a contact while they're on site should issues arise. And so, for example, if one window gets missed during the cleaning, that can be caught in real time rather than after the fact and have the contractor come back to return and clean one window. Contractors appreciate having an on-site resource, and obviously avoiding a repeat visit is best for everyone. Some council members, for example, also meet with, for example, their landscape maintenance contractor on a weekly basis. This is another fantastic example of building a strong contractor relationship to best benefit your strata community. It gives you an opportunity to have regular communication around priorities, and it can essentially ease everyone's workload, including councils, because you're having those regular conversations and ensuring that everyone is on the same page regularly. Remember, though, when you're speaking to contractors, you're speaking with council authority. So if you're planning to have a conversation with a contractor about a project, ensure that you have the authority to make decisions on behalf of the council. So for example, have that conversation with your council first. We generally suggest that you don't go rogue and approve work or projects without the support of your fellow council members. Ultimately, you wouldn't want your fellow council members doing that. And so we would just ask, of course, that we all respect one another in those communications with contractors. Okay, I have interrupted Dario, but I'm going to throw it back to him to talk about communicating clearly.
All right, clear communication. So this is vital to ensure we're not making mistakes. We're not making more work for ourselves by having to create that mistake, correct those mistakes, or continually having to explain and re-explain things to each other. So it's important for you and your fellow council members to have clear understandings on the processes. As I said before, if a lock needs to be fixed, does that need an email vote from all 7 council members? Does it need an email vote from 4 out of 7 council members? Does it need just one person to call and just let council know they did it later? What is everyone happy with? Everyone should be on the same page about that, and we should be discussing to get everyone on the same page about that so that we can be working efficiently. And one of the most important pieces of communication in terms of potential for error is when council is officially asking a contractor or Proline to do something. So as an example, I have an experience with council meeting minutes. I remember when I first started as a strata manager, I would send copy of minutes out to everyone on council. I would often get responses, I'd get responses from 3 out of 7 council members. 2 of the council members would contradict each other in what they wanted changed, and then I wouldn't hear anything back from council for a week. So I'd incorporate the changes as best I could, send the minutes out to owners, And then a few hours later, I got an email from the fourth council member saying, hey, everyone, sorry for the delay, but I spent a lot of time looking through these minutes and I made a lot of suggestions. Here they are, which really sucked because that person did put a lot of time into it. Everyone who reviewed those minutes put a lot of time into it. And basically, a lot of that work got wasted just because of unclear communication about when those minutes should be going out to owners. So an easy way to avoid this is to have one person, generally the strata secretary, be the person to give Proline final approval to post the minutes. Everyone can help review the minutes if they want, but if the secretary can collect the feedback together and send it to the strata manager in one email, this avoids different council members asking Proline to do contradictory things, and it ensures Proline is not posting the minutes until everyone on council is ready. And that's just an example in the minutes, but a similar process applies when we're working on a project, getting quotes. Again, this applies both to interacting with Proline and interacting with a contractor. Make sure council is on the same page about what you want to do, and have one person send, the contractor or Proline, hey, we've all discussed this and we've all agreed that this is what we need to do. And that way, you won't find yourself as a council member coming back to your emails. Say you took the weekend off looking at your emails, you come back from a nice relaxing break and you find that all your fellow council members have made a bunch of decisions without you, just assuming that your silence meant approval. Because again, you hadn't discussed in advance whether that would be okay to do or not. And at the end of the day, if something is complicated and it requires a lot of communication, if there's more than, 3 or 4 emails going back and forth, especially if it's getting up to the 10 email mark, save it for the next council meeting. I know we live in a fast-paced world, like I said before. We're used to being able to send an email in the morning and have the response by noon. But your strata is a corporation worth tens of millions of dollars. And the decisions you make will have consequences lasting years, sometimes decades. Unless it's an emergency like a leak or a hazard that could hurt someone, most things do not need to be solved within 24 or 48 hours. If you have a great idea for the strata today, it will still be a great idea 2 weeks from now when you have your next council meeting. And again, it's not because we here at Proline just love putting the brakes on councils from doing things. It's just that a 5-minute conversation in a council meeting can often be way more productive than hours spent sending dozens and dozens of emails back and forth. And sometimes in a council meeting, we don't have all the information we need. And that's okay. We can just assign someone, maybe it's a council member, maybe it's Proline, to go ahead, get that information, and then we can bring it forward to discuss it again at the next council meeting. And I know that seems counterintuitive because we all see these to-do lists and we all just want to get everything done and get them off our plate. But first of all, the business of a strata is never done. The to-do list will never be empty. And again, you're making more work for yourself by doing all this work outside of council meetings, trying to push everything forward. You're all volunteers. Your time is valuable. Your time is limited. You can spend, again, a 10-minute conversation in a council meeting can often accomplish way more than weeks of emailing back and forth, spending 3-5 hours on your emails trying to get a project done if you would have just waited and had the brief conversation at a council meeting. And if something really is an emergency, consider calling an emergency council meeting. Under the standard bylaws, you can call a council meeting with 7 days notice to your fellow council members, or if everyone on council agrees to waive the requirement, you can just call a council meeting with no notice. And maybe you need Proline there to help you, and maybe you don't. Maybe it's a 10-minute meeting just so you can all get on the same page again about what you're going to ask Proline to do or what you're going to ask the contractor to do. If it's worth doing it right. And I believe you will find that in the long run, these things that seem like inconveniences and extra hurdles to making decisions will actually be saving you time in the long run. So again, clear communication, know in advance what you as a council member can action independently, know what you need to discuss as a group before emailing Proline, know what things are best saved for council meetings. And speaking of that, I will pass it back to Christy to talk about the joy of council meetings.
Thanks, Dario. So for those of you that know me, you will know that I have gone to a few meetings in my time at Proline. I definitely have some ideas in terms of what makes the best meetings. First and foremost, always, they should be fun. They should not take forever, but there should always be laughter in a meeting. If we don't laugh at least once, it's not a successful meeting, as far as I'm concerned. So fun, fast, and productive. But meetings should typically be less than 2 hours. If you're having if your meetings are regularly going over 2 hours, you may be focusing too much time on the little stuff rather than focusing on the big ticket items. The 2 hour mark is generally where we see council members often starting to burn out, and discussions typically are getting less and less productive as we hit that 2 hour mark and go beyond that. Generally, each topic should only take a few minutes to discuss. Spending 5 to 10 minutes on a single item typically means that it's a major, and you shouldn't really be spending 10 minutes talking about small items. If you're unsure of how to move forward, there's typically two options. Make a decision or get more information. If you need more information, get it. If you've got enough information, make a decision. If you're circling around the decision, call the vote and move on. If there's a disagreement during the discussion, call the vote and move on. If you can't come to an agreement and it's not an urgent item, defer it to the next meeting. Give everyone a chance to settle, digest, and come to the next meeting and kind of rehash it at that point. It's also really important to stay on topic. Council meetings, as I said, should be fun and can also serve as a social event for council members. And sometimes it's the only time that you get as council members to come together, share some snacks, and that's great, but also be mindful of tangents. Sometimes when we're talking about a fire inspection and one unit gets missed, it can lead us down a road of all kinds of topics that are not relevant at council meetings. And we don't need to spend our time talking about whether or not 101 was inspected and is that Janet's unit, is Janet an owner or a tenant? We don't need to go down that road. And we want these meetings to be productive, or as productive as possible. It's also really important to be clear in the meetings on who is taking responsibility for what. And so a part of that is the to-do list tool, because after each meeting, you will get the to-do list and it will identify what the action item is and who is responsible for tackling it. So in the meeting, it is critical to identify who that person is. In terms of scheduling meetings, we suggest that you take a consistent approach. So there are many strata councils that set out their full fiscal year of strata council meetings at the forefront of their fiscal year at their first strata council meeting after their AGM, and that's great. And there's lots of councils that set their strata council meetings at the end of their current meeting. Whatever approach is best for your strata council is perfectly fine. Just try to be consistent with that approach so that owners can generally know when to expect meetings and when to expect minutes. In terms of the minutes themselves, they should include the crux of the meeting to build trust in the community, but it's also the institutional record for the Strata Corporation. So we want to ensure that the minutes are a bit of a story of the context and the reasons behind the decision, not only the decision, so that if 8 years down the road, you really need to understand why it was that we replaced that door on the north side of the building and why we didn't do the repair. If you've got that context in the meeting minutes, it makes it much easier to understand what the parameters of that decision were. And then in terms of general meeting considerations, be mindful that throughout your fiscal year and throughout your Strata Council meetings, you are going to come across projects and topics that you may want to ensure get added onto the agenda for your next general meeting. Don't lose sight of those. And the best way not to allow those to fall through the cracks is to ensure that they're added to your to-do list. So we can add a carry forward or an AGM general meeting list on the to-do list separate from your current action items, and we can shelve those general meeting considerations there so that once we get closer to your general meeting, we can have a really fulsome discussion about those topics. Okay. So moving on to clarifying standard processes. We've talked about the recipe for the best meeting, but we also want to ensure that the processes that we have in place and the decisions that we're making are based on consistency, and that we set expectations clearly in terms of what that approach is in the beginning. It's kind of the same concept that Dario introduced earlier, where we have conversations to set expectations. And generally, we like to do that at the beginning of a fiscal year. It makes the most sense to have that conversation right up front. You may have a council that has 7 returning members, so you're all on the same page and you are going to maintain the same set of expectations and approach you did the last fiscal year, and that's great. But often you see new members elected at the AGM, and so you want to have a conversation about what the approach is to decision making. And this can cover a plethora of topics, including bylaw warnings, small maintenance items, etc. There are a variety of interesting projects that ultimately will cross the desk of a council member. And so we will never be able to plan for all of them, but having a general approach to decision making is really helpful. And setting that expectation up front will ease everyone's mind, including your strata manager. In terms of instructions to your strata manager, you also want to have a discussion or an understanding of what circumstances we should be sending out, we being Proline, sending out different types of correspondence, how best to communicate with the strata council. So for example, Dario had talked about council meeting minutes and having the the draft minutes funneled through the secretary. So we just want to have an expectation of what that process looks like so that everyone is on the same page. And ultimately, this goes back to working efficiently and saving everybody time. Remember, 40 years in business providing property management services. So please do trust in Proline standard processes. We have, over the course of those years, tweaked and revised and tweaked all of our processes to ensure that they are efficient, as simple as possible, and productive. We have over 200 stratas that we manage currently, and we want to make sure that each of them gets the best level of service possible. And so we ensure that through those standard processes and efficiencies. If in doubt, please do take a peek at your Strata Press website. Under the Council Only folder, we have the Council Member Manual. It includes a wealth of information on standard processes that Proline follows as we work on behalf of the Strata Corporation, including things like how we handle the arrears management, for example. So if you have questions around processes, that's a great tool. Also, always feel free to reach out to your strata manager. And again, having that kind of upfront conversation at the first strata council meeting following your AGM will really serve a strata council well in setting expectations and clarifying those standard processes. Okay, so what happens if maybe you haven't set those processes and expectations? You may run into a conflict. Conflicts arise all of the time, and so ultimately it's how we handle them. And so before we launch into this conversation, we are going to pop another poll. So have you ever experienced a major conflict within your strata council? Yes or no? While you're answering the poll, we're going to touch on essentially two kinds of conflict between council members, and then conflict between council and Proline. Just give a second for those poll results to come in. Perfect. So we have 41% yes, 59% no. So a good split here with some experience with conflict. So first and foremost, a strata council, based on the standard bylaws under the Strata Property Act, is a minimum of 3 people and a maximum of 7. And this is for a reason. It is not a dictatorship. It's not meant to be a dictatorship. It's meant to be a sampling of a variety of owner opinions throughout the community. And so with a mix of up to 7 people, you're going to get a variety of different opinions and different thoughts and different ways of doing things, which obviously includes a chance for conflict because not everyone is the same. So when conflict arises between council members, ultimately we want to tie back to the foundations of a healthy relationship. We want to be open, transparent, respectful, courteous of one another, but we also want to be curious. And I say curious because it is important in conflict to have the courage to have a conversation and be curious. Ask questions and try not to escalate the situation. We want to ultimately try to attempt to understand the other person's point of view. And so asking questions and being curious about where they're coming from and what their thoughts are will help to not only diffuse the situation because you're hearing the other party out, but it'll also give you better perspective in terms of where they're coming from. As a reminder, though, all council business is confidential and should not be shared outside of your strata council. So if you need to vent, which some of us need to do, please find another council member and do it productively and privately. Do not slip into the pitfall of gossip. We don't want to go there. If a disagreement cannot be untangled on council and it has cropped up in a meeting, call a vote and move on. Or if things are too heated, table the discussion for another time when it can be held productively. The last thing you want to do is force a decision on a council that is in a conflict. There may be also a conflict that leads to a council member essentially going rogue and making decisions and completing actions without the authority of the rest of council. And as we know, decisions of the strata council are generally made by majority vote. And so one council member cannot vote on behalf of everyone. So how do you deal with a rogue council member? Ultimately, it comes back to those foundations of a healthy relationship. We want to be courageous. We want to ensure that we're communicating. And ultimately, we have to stand up and outvote them. It is not a dictatorship. There are 3 to 7 members, and one rogue council member ultimately can easily be outvoted. But again, it comes down to being courageous. If you've got a council member where the conflict is just consistent and ultimately the best solution is to remove that council member from the strata council, please consult your bylaws. Different strata corporations will have adopted different bylaws to address how to remove a council member, but often you will have to call a general meeting in order to remove a council member from the strata council. So tread lightly in that area and be sure to ask your strata manager for assistance and support and advice around how to handle that. Lastly, in terms of bullying behavior, unfortunately, it does happen. You know, there's a mix of opinions, obviously, in terms of how best to handle bullying behavior. But again, I think it comes down to having courage, coming from a place of curiosity, but ultimately standing up for what you believe in and potentially looking at removing that council member if it's become completely impossible to move forward with strata business. Now, what happens when you have conflict between your strata council and Proline? Obviously, you email Andy Sperling, the Proline president, immediately and ask for your strata manager to be fired, right? No? Well, that's certainly not what we would prefer. One of the paradigms that Proline holds very dearly in terms of how we operate and work is radical transparency. And so ultimately, if there is a conflict that crops up between your strata council and Proline, which happens, we're all human beings, we want to encourage and have open conversation and dialogue about it. Please do communicate with your strata manager if you have concerns. We also have a very supportive team of supervisors and managers to assist if you need additional support, but ultimately the first step is to communicate directly with your strata manager and ultimately work through the conflict. sometimes easier said than done. So I'm going to pass it off back to Dario. He's going to talk to the odds and ends of working together effectively, the extra stuff.
Okay, yes, thank you. And we are running a little over time. I'm sorry for that. However, there are a bunch of random little things that did not fit anywhere else in this topic, but we did want to still talk about. And I will try to go through those efficiently as we've been talking about efficiency here. So one is creating community, which can means being a good neighbor. It means being mindful about how your actions will impact the community, coming to the AGM. That's all important. But again, also creating community through clear communication, consistency. Often the reason for friction between people in a community is because of misunderstandings and confusion. And having consistent, predictable processes that are effective for governing your strata's business will also help create community by establishing fair practices that give owners the sense and trust that council is doing what's best for the community. If owners can expect that every alteration request will be dealt with at the next scheduled council meeting, then they know what timelines to expect when they want to redo their flooring. Don't let them feel like fools if you are constantly making exceptions for everyone else and just punishing them for following the process. Sometimes exceptions are appropriate, but if you find you're making exceptions to your processes more often than you're following the processes, then you need to re-examine that process and why it was established in the first place and maybe change it. So that again, change, if you're making an exception all the time, just change your process to be that exception, but just be clear to owners what the process is. Clarity is kindness. Consistency will build trust, and that trust will build relationships. You're not being mean by asking residents or your fellow council members by following the processes. You're just being fair to other residents and giving everyone expectations on things that might be done. And again, making an exception might seem like the fastest way to solve a problem in the short term, but long term, by creating these inconsistencies, you may just be by making more work for yourself and for everyone. And at the end of the day, going back to the just being a good neighbor part, we did a community ambassador session last year. Christy did with Sherry. To summarize a few points from that, don't neglect the importance of community events, passive events like decorating your balconies for Halloween, active events like meet and greets, something as simple as reaching out to new residents to give them information about the buildings. Establishing those personal connections with people, allowing residents to see each other as people and not just noise complaint generators, is going to be a important part of building that trust. And again, putting everyone on the same page that we're all working together to make the strata the best it can be. Now transitions, the most fun slide on this in this slideshow. So like all businesses, especially over the past few years, Proline has had employee turnover. I do want to assure council members, first of all, that Proline does have an institutional knowledge. We have records about your strata, the common issues, ongoing projects. Things like this get passed down from manager to manager when there's a change, or if your regular manager is out sick, for example, or if something unexpected happens. We also, I know you never see them, but we have a whole team of accountants. We have a whole team of administrative professionals. We have operations coordinators. They all work behind the scenes, and I am super grateful for them. And they provide a continuity of service in your accounting, in your admin, in your communications, like bylaw letters, between strata managers, even when they change. But even still, when you spend months or years building a personal working relationship between you as an individual council member and your individual strata manager, of course, there is going to be a bit of a bump when that changes. And in those times, the Proline manager, the new Proline manager, is going to fall back on Proline's internal institutional knowledge. Again, reading all those files we have about your strata, reading your past council meeting minutes, reading your past through AGMs, getting up to date on everything that's going on. And as a council, you want to be kind of doing the same thing, relying on each other, relying on your own history, rereading your own council meeting minutes to make sure you're on top of what's going on. And when council changes, it can be the same thing, especially if you have everyone on council change or almost everyone on council change. You can rely on us just as we rely on you when we've switched strata managers. But also, have a meeting between the old and the new council members. As an outgoing council member, meet up with the new council members, hand over any keys you have, give them a little tour. Don't make it a 2-hour session. Don't make it about every little thing that the outgoing council wants the new council to do. Just touch base. And as a former council member who continues to have a financial and personal investment in the well-being of the strata, offer yourself as a resource for the new council to contact if anything comes up, immediately or in the future, months, years from now. Without minimizing the real impact employee turnover or council turnover can have. The overall relationship is between the strata and Proline. Your strata is still the strata. Proline is still the Proline. All of the same information is there. We just need to make sure that we're taking advantage of it. And finally, I'm going to talk quickly about strategic planning. This is one of the areas that as your strata managers, as your advisors, you can really lean on us for. And by taking some of those smaller to-do list tasks for yourself, you can give us more time to delve into these things and get the most bang for your buck again out of the time we're spending on your strata. So as licensed strata managers, we're experienced at reading through the Strata Property Act, the bylaws, your depreciation report, connecting with engineers, planning timelines for special general meetings and special levies. And also rely on us for that, and don't be afraid to rely on the contractors as well, just as we're going to. Like Christy said before, I don't know what a roof repair looks like. We're going to ask the roof repair company what kind of roof repairs we need. And that goes back to having a good relationship with those contractors, knowing that you can trust them to give you good advice, and if they're recommending something, that it's a good recommendation and that they will be actively recommending those things. And be prepared with major projects for a long process. If you're thinking of spending $50,000, $100,000 next year, first spend $5,000 on an engineering report to find out if that work is necessary or if the scope of work needs to change. Don't go too far down the path with projects that may turn out to be unnecessary or that we may not fully understand. Doing it correct will make it faster in the long run. Identify council members or, again, your property manager who's going to head up each project, and allow non-council resident volunteers to be part of committees. The committee shouldn't make decisions, but a committee can gather all of the information to put forward a recommendation or options for council to consider at their council meeting. Have someone on the committee be in charge of submitting a report to council at least a week before the meeting, so it can be included on the agenda. Council has a week before the meeting to read through the report. And when we arrive at the council meeting, we can just discuss what the next steps are. Do we have questions? Can we vote on this? If we can't vote on this and we have questions, it's just, what are those questions? Great, let's send those questions back to the committee. Again, the committee could even be, 2 council members who have volunteered to just take on that project. But we don't need to have all 7 people working on every project. This can be a good place to divide and conquer, separate between council meetings, have each individual person working on their own individual projects. Again, not making the final decisions, just gathering the information. Then we come together at the council meetings, present to each other, and make those decisions in the council meetings. So set your top priorities. Set maybe 1 or 2 big priorities for council. Again, maybe all 7 people need to be heavily involved in a big project. And if there's more going on than that, break it down so we're not doing too much at once. We can each put 100% of our time and attention into one project, or we can each put 20% of our time and attention into 5 different projects. So again, assign some things to individual council members, decide what's appropriate to assign to your strata manager. What's the best value for me, Dario, to be spending my time on? What's the best value for you as the council member to be spending your time on? And then we'll split off and get that done. And don't sweat the small stuff. There's an important fable I learned early on about a strata who had a $500,000 roof repair and also needed to build a bike enclosure. Roof repairs being very big and difficult to visualize, nobody wanted to talk about it, but everyone has opinions on what a bike enclosure should look like, what color it should be, how many bikes can fit. So you can guess which of those 2 topics the Strata Council spent the whole council meeting talking about. So be aware of the danger of getting sucked into the small stuff. Sometimes it's a passion project. And again, 1 or 2 council members or a committee just needs to take it on themselves and come back to council for final approval. Sometimes it's something that's just subjective. Not everyone's going to agree. You just need to vote on it and move on. You won't always get the bike enclosure that you wanted, but make sure you're getting the roof repair that the strata needs. And again, take advantage of those former council members, those volunteers at the AGM who was like, oh, I kind of want to be on council, but I don't think I have enough time. Great. Put them on committees, put them to work. Everyone in the strata can help out with this stuff. But again, have everything come through council at the end of the day. It can seem more efficient to be having committees making the big decisions by themselves, but that part is eroding the proper processes, which will create confusion and more time in the long run. The idea, again, is for us to each separate, get the information, and then come back to make the decisions as a group. And at the very end of the day, look, the strata world is a crazy world, and all of us, council members, owners, Proline members, we're just trying to make it through as best we can. You joined council because you want to do a good job on council. We here at Proline became strata managers because we want to help you build successful communities and manage your properties. I said it earlier, but often conflict and stress just comes down to misunderstanding, miscommunications, unclarity about what the processes should be. So when there is a conflict, whether it's with a contractor, whether it's with Proline, whether it's with a fellow council member, again, just approach that with curiosity. Try to find out why the other person is recommending something or feels that way. Try to identify what it is you actually want to achieve. And if, we'll approach you the same way. And if we all approach it that way, we can all work together and we can make your community the best that it can be. Thanks very much for your time. And now we will go to questions and feedback.
Awesome. Okay. So we do have a few questions in the Q&A regarding new members. Do you have educational sessions on nomination processes for strata council members, i.e. approaching potential council members? Who does this? Does council set up a nomination committee, best practices? I can tackle that one. I work within a number of stratas where the councils do strike nomination committees. And I think ultimately that is the best practice, is to get, 2 or 3 council members actively having discussions within your community and with owners about being on council and having fun in council meetings, right? Because that's what we're doing. You as owners within your community are the best players to approach and potentially bring in new council members. And so certainly authorizing a small committee to kind of work through how best to bring new players into the mix is the best practice. And then developing kind of an onboarding process for those new council members is certainly a good step to take, and that can look differently in different communities. I work with a community where the first council meeting after the AGM, the former council members attend and the new council members attend, so that there's a nice trade of information, a sharing of experiences, and ultimately it sends the new council off into success for the next year. Okay.
Okay, I just want to grab a quick question from the chat that was answered earlier, which is about meetings that Proline doesn't attend. So you can have a contract with Proline that Proline attends a certain number of council meetings, but council can have as many meetings as council wants to have. This is just the time that you pay for. You pay for a certain number of 2-hour maximum sessions with us. We can charge you more if you need us to attend more council meetings. But if you have meetings without us, those are still official council meetings. And yes, those don't need, to answer the question, those do need to have minutes that go out to the owners, because it's not Proline being there that makes it an official council meeting. It's council getting together and voting on things for the strata to do that makes it an official council meeting. And if you are going to have a meeting without Proline, it's really easy. We can just give you a very simple template to fill out. You just got to fill out who was there and what was voted on, and then send it back to us the day after the meeting, and we can get that published to Strata Press for you to go out to all the owners.
All right, recognizing it's 101, and we are a little bit over time. I'm going to quickly go through these questions. If you need to leave, feel free. Donna asks, can council delegate the contracted janitorial or another volunteer to meet with the plumber, etc.? Absolutely, 100%. You can delegate anyone to meet with contractors on site. What the council cannot do is delegate the authority to make decisions on behalf of the Strata Council. Next is a comment from Bonnie Jean. Conflict can also be between an owner and council. The owner can then stir up other owners, and that is absolutely true, and potentially another academy session in the future. Where do I find Strata Council manual, Proline standard processes, template for minutes, etc.? So on the Strata Press website, there is a council only folder. That's where you'll find the manual with the standard processes. If you need a template for minutes, reach out to your Strata manager and they can provide that to you. Pauline asks, we have 6 council meetings with our Proline contract. If council members have an additional meeting in between, should these minutes be posted on Strata Press? Pauline, I would say yes. If you're holding extra meetings and making decisions, those should be minuted and then distributed to owners, and we can certainly help you facilitate that. Last one, how often do Stratas pay for second opinions on expert reports, for example, on balcony refurbishment? Do you want to handle that one, Dario, or do you want me to tackle that one?
I mean, the answer is it depends. But it is important if you have big projects going on to get that expert advice. Like I said, if you're going to be spending $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 on a project, it's worth the $500,000, $2,000 you'll spend off the hop to get professional advice. We can give you advice on how that project interacts with the Strata Property Act and what we've seen, how we've seen other similar projects go in the past. Just like, if you've had a similar project like that, you can do that. But if you are talking about, again, what is the state of these balconies, it's going to be worth the money to get an engineer out to give their professional advice.
Excellent. Okay. And we also had one more in the chat, and it was, how many property managers do you have and how many units do you work with or buildings do you manage? And so we have a lot. I'm just looking at the list. We have about a dozen, 12 to 15 licensed Strata property managers with a variety of different varying portfolios. We manage approximately between 11 and 12,000 units from the southern tip of the island up to Campbell River. And I think we're somewhere around maybe 215 stratas total right now. Just a perspective on the strata portfolio here at Proline. Having said that, though, that is those are all of the questions. So I would just like to thank everyone for attending. And if Catherine has anything to wrap up the session before we head out here.
No, just a quick comment. Thanks everybody for attending. As Christy said, thanks Christy and Dario. And like I said at the beginning, it was recorded. You'll see it coming up in your inbox as a link to the recording on a YouTube channel. So if you need to refer back to it or want to share it with other council members who weren't able to attend, please feel free. And that is the end of that for today. So thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate you being here.